Alright, we're going to start this section 2 of chapter 7, which is about Hamilton and the national finances. And the section is all about Hamilton and finances, but it's also about the relationship and the differences between Jefferson and Hamilton, and that's really the theme that we see throughout, the differences between those two and how it led to the creation of political parties, the Federalist Party and the Democratic Republicans. So let's go ahead and get started talking about Hamilton, his ideas on tackling the national and state debt. As we know, Hamilton was a member of Washington's cabinet, and in particular, he's in charge of the Treasury. His biggest challenge was paying off the national debt. And in Hamilton's mind, the national debt wasn't just the debt owned by the federal government, it was the debt owed by the states after the Revolutionary War. In Hamilton's mind, the Revolutionary War debt was a federal issue because it's a federal issue deciding to go to war and instituting war against Great Britain and fighting that war. It's a federal issue, it's not a state issue. So Hamilton's idea was for the federal government to assume all of the debt of all 13 states. So they did. They bought up that debt and agreed to pay it off. And as you see, it ended up being over $50 million. $11 million, or 11.7 owed to foreign countries, and 40.4 owed to United States citizens. Seems kind of odd that United States citizens would owe debt to their own, or the government would owe money to its own citizens, but that's the way it is even today. A great deal of the nation's debt is actually owned by its own citizens. And that's one of the reasons Hamilton knew that some of the wealthy Americans were important, because he knew that they could help finance this nation through buying bonds, and then the government would pay them back. So Hamilton had a close relationship and helped to protect some of the rich people in the nation, because he understood that they were needed to help fund this nation. That we didn't want all of our debt coming from foreign countries, we want some of our debt coming from our own citizens. Hamilton's plan was to pay the foreign debt first, and over time pay the full value of the debt. One of the things about debt is that it's not bad for a country to necessarily have debt as long as you pay it off. And actually, if a country does assume debt and then pays it off in a timely manner, it helps build up your credit score, and that can lead to more loans in the future from other countries and a good credit score. Just like a individual would have a good credit score, so they'd be more likely to get a home or a car. Or if our nation has a good credit score, more nations are more likely to loan us money, which is a good thing. If we have projects that we want to do now but we don't necessarily have the money for, you take out a loan, pay it back. It's not as bad as some people make it out to be. And national debt is actually common amongst all countries and pretty much necessary. You know, even your parents, if they want to buy something large and expensive, oftentimes, in particular like a home, oftentimes you take out a loan. It's natural. You don't want to wait years and years and years to save up that money. You need to buy it now, and then you pay it off over time. That's what our country was looking to do. Some politicians, including Thomas Jefferson, they were very opposed to this plan. They didn't want our country assuming that debt. They didn't want the federal government to be expanded into that role of assuming that debt and paying off that debt. Thomas Jefferson obviously led the way, and we'll go more into Jefferson here in a little bit. One quote, and unfortunately the quote got cut off there by the screen, but a national debt, if it is not excessive, will be to us a national blessing. So the us got cut off there, sorry. That's a quote from Alexander Hamilton. And you don't often think of debt as being a blessing. Ask your parents if they consider their debt a blessing. Most wouldn't. But to your country, like I said, if you can take on a little bit of debt and pay it off over time, on time without paying too much interest, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, so this sets up the opposition and the political rivalry between Jefferson and Hamilton, this idea on the differences between how to pay off the debt. Okay, Hamilton was a member of the Federalist Party, and the Federalist Party, they're definitely the party of the elite, the party of the rich. They believed in a strong central government, a strong national government, that the national government should basically be superior to all the state governments and have more power. And they were very much in favor of giving the federal government more power, and we'll see that later on through the Elastic Clause. They wanted to balance the power between the mass of the people and the wealthier citizens, and giving the wealthier citizens a big stake in this country financially through bonds. Okay, so a rich individual would take on a bond, which is basically they give money now to the government. The government can use that, and the government will pay them back over time with interest. Hamilton understood that if the wealthy Americans were involved in our finances and involved in the prosperity of America, they'd be more likely to succeed because they had a financial stake in it. If for some reason the American government began to falter, the wealthy people in America would step up and play an active role in ensuring that didn't happen because they had money in it. So he wanted the wealthy citizens of America very much in the fold and very much active in financing our country through debt, through bonds. Hamilton also wanted to promote manufacturing business. Hamilton was very much in favor of the British model, okay? Having a strong manufacturing base, lots of businesses, lots of industry, lots of trade, okay? A lot of that was primarily taking place in the North. The North had a strong manufacturing base already, and it would continue to grow. It wasn't that way so much in the South, and you'll see that in a moment here with Jefferson's view. He also wanted to place a higher tariff on foreign goods to protect American manufacturers. So a tariff would make all imports coming into the country more expensive. Okay, so if you have, let's say, tea coming in from Great Britain, we're going to put a tax on that and make it more expensive. That way you're buying tea from America instead of buying tea from Great Britain. It makes all foreign goods more expensive and promotes business in America, promotes you buying American good. Okay, American goods. You've probably seen bumper stickers that says, buy products made in the USA or made in the USA. People are proud of buying American-made goods. And that's called protectionism. That's something we still grapple with today and people still want today, but there's also side effects to it. What happens is that countries retaliate by putting a tariff on your goods and making the items that you export to other countries more expensive. But at the time, we weren't as concerned with that. We just wanted to make sure that American goods were being bought. So that's kind of the Federalist view. Once again, very much in support of business, very much in support of business owners, manufacturing, and this agenda is just going to make the rich richer. It's going to make the factory owners and the business owners more wealthy. Jefferson and his party, the Democratic Republicans, they had a very different point of view. Okay, they wanted to protect state power, and this is one of the early rivalries and early differing point views in government. What was more important, state power or federal power? The Democratic Republicans wanted strong states. Thomas Jefferson, being from Virginia, he regarded Virginia as his own country. Okay, he saw himself as a citizen of the United States of America, but he also saw himself as a citizen of Virginia. And you see that in southern states. They wanted to maintain their state identity and make sure that their states had a great degree of power. I also believed in the right of the people to rule the country, that the common American should have just as much power as anyone else, that we shouldn't give advantages necessarily to wealthier citizens. We shouldn't kind of tilt the favor towards wealthy people in this country, that should be equal across the board. He also supported agriculture and farming, and that's because agriculture and farming was much more important to the southern economy at that time. The plantation system was still firmly in place. Farmers in the South were making vast profits through farming, partially because of the slavery that was taking place there. But agriculture is very important to the southern economy, so Jefferson wanted to promote that. He saw a model where the majority of Americans were farmers. They produced just enough to provide for themselves, and there wasn't excessive entanglement in business and manufacturing. There wouldn't be a whole lot in that in America, not beyond what you needed basically to own and operate a farm. He also didn't believe all that much in foreign trade, that any trade in the country should happen between Americans. So it's a much simpler economy that Jefferson had in mind. He also wanted to keep tariffs low so that all the goods that farmers would have to buy from foreign countries would be cheaper. He didn't want prices to be hiked up because of a trade war between, United States and whatever country, both sides imposing tariffs. He wanted to keep prices as low as possible for the common American and for the farmers. So Hamilton's position, he wanted the national bank because he thought it would be a place where the government could safely deposit its money. The money being the revenues that they made off of taxes. And one of those taxes was a whiskey tax that we'll talk about in the next section. The banks would be able to make loans to the government and to businesses. So it would be a private bank that did business with other banks and other businesses and the United States government. Hamilton understood that this would not be popular in the South. He's very wise politically. He understood that the southern states would would not be in favor of this law. So he knew he had to bargain. He knew he had to compromise. One of the things he compromised on was moving the capital. The capital at the time was in New York City, and between the bank being in New York City, most of the wealth in the country being in the north, and the capital being in New York City, he knew that the South would feel like they had no stake in this country. Everything's in the north, all the power's in the north. What do we have? So he agreed to actually move the capital from New York to where it currently is in Washington, D.C. And they also got their tariff on imports to help encourage Americans to buy American-made goods. Okay, Jefferson's position, and it's really Jefferson and Madison's position, they believe that Hamilton's plan gave too much power to the federal government, that this was an expansion of federal power, and they were worried about that. They thought it was unconstitutional because if you look through the Constitution, there actually is no place where it mentions the creation of a bank. Okay, so Jefferson and Madison, they said that's not constitutional. You're not allowed to do that. You cannot create a national bank. So Jefferson feared that between the bank and the tariffs, that too much power is being placed in the North. The North would just continue to get richer and richer, and the South would fall behind and lose importance and lose power. In dealing with the issue of constitutionality of a national bank, Hamilton brought up the Elastic Clause, okay, that Congress can make all laws which shall be necessary and proper to govern the nation. And Hamilton argued that a national bank was necessary to govern the nation. And this really gets into the two different views of interpreting the Constitution. On one side we have Jefferson and Madison, okay? And they favored what's called strict construction, all right? And in strict construction, you can only do what the Constitution says. If it's not in the Constitution, you cannot do it. And one of the things that was not stated in the Constitution is a national bank. So to Hamilton and Jefferson, you absolutely could not create a national bank. Their view of the Constitution is very limited. It doesn't provide a lot of flexibility, and it's kind of concerning thinking about what our nation might have been like if we had stuck straight to the Constitution and only changed it when we went through the amendment process. We haven't talked about the amendment process, but it's pretty extensive. On the opposite side of that, we have Hamilton's view, which is loose construction. And loose construction is exactly the opposite. It says that the government can take any actions that the Constitution does not forbid. So Hamilton wanted a much more open interpretation of the Constitution, that the Constitution wasn't this strict, set-in-stone document, that it could evolve and grow over time, and that as long as it's not strictly forbidden in the Constitution, you can do it. You can take that action. You can do things like create a national bank. You can do things like create new cabinet posts and create new and different laws that aren't directly stated in the Constitution. So this is a big point of contention. This is a big debate that would go on. You have on one side the Democratic Republicans and their strict view of the Constitution, not wanting to change it, not wanting to adapt it, not wanting to change all that much from the original document. And on the other side you have loose construction of Hamilton and the Federalists, who believe that the Constitution should grow and evolve over time. And we're going to see that debate continue on, and we're going to see some of these differences in opinions between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans continue for years and years, all the way up to now, quite honestly. So some of these issues are still being debated and still being pondered. But either way, to wrap up the section, we did get the bank. Okay, the Bank of the United States, it was created in 1791 and it was given a 20-year charter and would continue until its 20-year charter was up, and then eventually it was renewed. That's all for today. Let me know if you have any questions. Post them on My Big Campus. Thanks.